Return from the Abyss, Book 1.
Prologue. The Sacrifice. The village of Ashfall had always been a place where smoke rose from chimneys and children's laughter echoed through narrow streets. Now, in the 31st night of siege, only screams rose into the blood-red sky. Elder Gregor stood at the western barricade, watching the darkness beyond the torchlight. His hands, gnarled and scarred from 60 years of life, trembled as they gripped his walking staff. Behind him, the village square was filled with exhausted faces, mothers clutching starving infants, warriors bearing fresh wounds, children too weak to cry. "How many tonight?" he asked without turning. Marcus Reed, the captain of what remained of the village guard, spat blood onto the dirt. His left arm hung useless at his side, the bandage already soaked through. 4 warriors down, 7 civilians. The eastern barricade won't hold another night. "It has to. It won't." Marcus's voice was flat, drained of hope. "Half our fighters are dead, Gregor. The rest are too wounded or too exhausted to lift a sword. We're out of arrows. The healers have no more herbs. The children—" He stopped, unable to finish. Gregor closed his eyes. The elder could hear it in the silence, the absence of sound that should have filled a village this size. No hammers on anvils, no merchants calling their wares, no children playing in the streets. Just the wind, carrying the stench of blood and the distant howls of things that should not exist. For 30 days, the monsters had come. Every sunset brought a new wave. Twisted creatures with too many limbs, shadows with teeth, things that wore human faces but moved wrong. The village fought, the village died, and still the monsters returned. "The sky," whispered Mara Thornwood, the village's oldest surviving mage. She was only 35, but looked 20 years older. Casting defensive wards night after night had drained the life from her. "It's been that color for 3 days now, blood red. The old texts call it the Crimson Veil, a sign of—" "Don't," Gregor snapped. "Don't speak of omens. We need solutions." "There are no solutions." Marcus slammed his good fist against the wooden palisade. "We're going to die here, all of us. The capital hasn't sent reinforcements. The neighboring villages are either dead or fled. We're alone." Silence fell over the gathered villagers. In that moment, the truth settled over them like a burial shroud. Then, the air changed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a single breath. Frost spread across the ground in crystalline patterns. The torches flickered and dimmed, their flames turning from orange to sickly blue. Every dog in the village began to howl. "What?" Marcus reached for his sword. The air tore. There was no other word for it. Reality split open like fabric, revealing something beneath. A darkness so complete it hurt to look at. The tear hung suspended 3 feet above the center of the village square, slowly widening, and from that impossible wound in the world, something emerged. First came a hand, long fingers, skin the color of old parchment, nails like black iron. Then an arm, draped in a cloak of absolute darkness. Finally, a figure stepped through, and the tear sealed behind it with a sound like breaking bones. The creature stood 7 feet tall. Its cloak seemed to drink in the torchlight, leaving its features shrouded in shadow. Only its eyes were visible, burning yellow, like coals in the darkness of its hood. When it spoke, its voice scraped against their minds like metal on stone. "Desperate creatures, clinging to life in your dying village." Gregor found his voice, though it cracked with fear. What are you?" The figure tilted its head, a gesture that was somehow wrong, as if the bones beneath the skin didn't quite align properly. A benefactor, or a butcher. That choice is yours. Get away from here, demon! Mara raised her hands, summoning the last dregs of Romana. Blue light flickered around her fingers, weak, pathetic, compared to the power that radiated from the cloaked figure. The creature didn't move. The light simply stopped. Mara gasped and collapsed, her magic crushed like an insect beneath a boot. I am not here to harm you, the voice continued, each word heavy with ancient weight. I am here to save you, to offer you what you cannot give yourselves, survival. Nothing is free, Gregor said, though his heart hammered in his chest. What do you want? The yellow eyes brightened. Understanding. Good. Yes, nothing is free. I offer food. Your stores will be full by dawn. Protection. The monsters will flee this place and never return. Salvation for your people, your children, your future. Hope, desperate and dangerous, flickered across the villagers' faces. Gregor felt it in his own chest, even as his mind screamed warnings. The price, Marcus demanded. Tell us the price. 1 life, the creature said simply. 1 living child. You give me this, and everything else I promise will be yours. The square erupted in chaos. Voices rose in protest, in horror, in desperate calculation. Gregor raised his staff, and slowly, painfully, silence returned. You're asking us to murder a child? He said. I am asking you to choose, the figure replied. 1 child, or every soul in this village. 1 innocent, or 300 deaths. 1 sacrifice, or extinction. The mathematics are simple, Elder. Even your primitive minds can calculate the cost. It's murder, shouted Elena Cross, clutching her 2 young sons close. We're not monsters. Then die as humans, the creature said without emotion. Noble, virtuous, dead. It matters not to me. I have eternity. You have hours, perhaps. The next wave comes at midnight. Gregor looked around at his people, at the warriors too wounded to stand, at the mothers with hollow-eyed children, at the teenagers who had taken up swords meant for adults, at the mass grave outside the village walls, fresh dirt still brown on the mound. How do we know you'll keep your word? He asked quietly. You don't. The yellow eyes fixed on him. But you know with certainty what comes if you refuse. Death. For everyone. Tell me, Elder, is 1 life too high a price for 300? The question hung in the air like poison. No one spoke. No one met each other's eyes. Because they all knew, God's help them, they all knew what they were going to say. Who? Gregor's voice was barely a whisper. Who would we? That is for you to decide. Choose wisely. Choose quickly. Midnight approaches. And then it simply waited, standing perfectly still, a statue of darkness in the center of their dying village. The debate that followed would haunt the survivors until their dying days. They tried to find volunteers, adults willing to sacrifice themselves. The creature refused. A child, it repeated, those are the terms. They tried to draw lots among all the children. Parents screamed, fought, begged. The village nearly tore itself apart. Finally, as the moon rose high and the distant howls of monsters began again, someone spoke. Kayden Ash, said Bernard Crow, the village blacksmith. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes.
He's an orphan. Parents died 3 months back. Fever took them both. He's got no family, no kin to speak for him. Silence greeted the words. Damning, horrible silence. He's 12 years old, Mara whispered. Just 12. So are my sons, Elena said, her voice breaking. So are half the children here. We all have to. Gods forgive us. We all have to. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Where is he? Gregor asked, and something in his soul withered as he spoke. They found Kayden Ash in the small house he'd been sleeping in since his parents died. The Thornwoods had taken him in, fed him, gave him a corner to sleep. He was thin. Everyone was thin now, with dark chestnut hair and brown eyes that had seen too much death for a 12-year-old. He looked up as they entered, saw the crowd, saw their faces, and he understood. No, he said simply. Please, no. I'm sorry, Gregor said, and he was. I'm so sorry, boy. They grabbed him, Marcus and Bernard, 2 of the strongest men left. Kayden fought. He screamed. He begged. He called out to the neighbors who had fed him, to the Thornwoods who had sheltered him, to anyone who would listen. No one met his eyes. Elena turned away, covering her son's ears. Mara wept openly, but did nothing. The villagers formed a corridor, a path of shame, leading to the village square where the cloaked figure waited. Please, Kayden's voice cracked. Please, I don't want to die. I don't want to go. Please. His pleas echoed off the wooden houses, unanswered. They dragged him to the square. The creature watched with those burning yellow eyes, showing nothing that might be called emotion. The choice is made, it said. Come here, child. Kayden struggled harder, terror giving him strength. No, no, don't let it take me. Help me. Someone help. The creature's hand shot out, impossibly fast, and touched Kayden's forehead with one cold finger. The boy's scream cut off mid-breath. Pain. Not physical. Something deeper, more fundamental. It felt like his soul was being pulled out through his skin, stretched and twisted and marked. Fire and ice and lightning all at once, burning through every nerve, every thought, every memory. The world exploded into agony beyond description. Through the pain, through the tears streaming down his face, Kayden saw those eyes, burning yellow in the darkness of that hood. Ancient, terrible, hungry. And he heard a whisper, words that bypassed his ears and spoke directly into his mind. Survive, little one. Survive, and you will be more than you ever dreamed. Fail, and your soul will feed the darkness. The choice is yours. The tear in reality reopened behind the creature. Kayden felt himself being pulled toward it, weightless, helpless. He tried to scream again, but had no voice. The last thing he saw was the village. His village. The place he'd been born, where his parents were buried, watching him disappear into the impossible darkness. Then the tear sealed. The creature was gone. The child was gone. Only silence remained. And, true to the creature's word, by dawn, the village stores were full. The monsters never returned. Ashfall was saved. 5 years later, a plague swept through the valley. Within 2 months, every man, woman, and child in Ashfall was dead. The village became a ghost town, slowly reclaimed by the forest, its buildings rotting, its streets empty. Some said it was coincidence. Others whispered that it was judgment, that the village's salvation had been cursed from the moment they handed over the child. No one ever spoke Kayden Ash's name again. Chapter 1. First Blood. 10 years had changed everything. Kayden Ash sat on a throne of bone, literally. The massive skull beneath him,
three-eyed and broad as a wagon wheel, had belonged to something that tried to eat him in his 3rd year here. He'd learned since then that the largest bones made the best seats. Comfort was a luxury measured in increments of less unbearable. Around him, his cave told the story of a decade in hell. Skeletal remains littered the stone floor in organized piles, sorted by size, density, and usefulness. Femurs thick as logs leaned against one wall. Clusters of smaller bones, sharp as knives, hung from crude hooks he'd carved into the rock. The largest skull served as his chair. A slightly smaller one held his meager water supply, collected drop by precious drop from condensation on the cave walls. His body was a map of survival. Scars crisscrossed every visible inch of skin, claw marks on his chest, a bite wound on his left shoulder that had nearly killed him, burns from acidic blood streaking down his right arm. His hair, once the dark chestnut of his father's, had turned bone white sometime in year 7. He couldn't remember exactly when. Time blurred here, measured not in days but in fights survived. His eyes were perhaps the worst change. Once brown and warm, his mother used to say they reminded her of fresh-turned earth. They were now a dull gray, like ash after a fire dies. They reflected nothing, felt nothing. In his right hand, he gripped his sword. The blade was a work of necessity, forged from the thigh bone of a massive reptilian predator he'd killed 3 years back. The bone was denser than any steel he remembered from before, light enough to wield single-handed, but hard enough to punch through armor-plating hide. He'd wrapped the grip with sinew and strips of tanned leather, replaced twice when they wore through. The edge was sharp enough to split hair. Not that there's any hair to split here, he thought distantly. Nothing grows in this place. In his other hand, he held breakfast, a chunk of raw meat torn from last night's kill. Some smaller predator, stupid enough to follow his scent trail back to the cave. He bit into it without ceremony, chewing mechanically. The taste was foul, somewhere between rotten fish and sulfur, but his stomach had long since stopped complaining. Food was food, fuel for the machine his body had become. Fire would have made it better. Cooked meat, the way his mother used to prepare it over the hearth, with herbs and... He cut the thought off savagely. That way led to madness. He'd learned that lesson in the 1st year, when grief and longing had nearly gotten him killed. Memories were dangerous here. They distracted. Distraction meant death. He finished eating and rose in one fluid motion. Every movement was economical now, stripped of wasted energy. 10 years of constant predation had taught him to move like the things that hunted him, silent, efficient, deadly. His eyes swept the entrance. Dawn, if that concept even existed here, was the most dangerous time. Nocturnal hunters returning to their lairs often passed by, and anything wounded or desperate might see his cave as an easy den to steal from. Nothing moved in the crimson half-light beyond. Time to move. Staying in one place too long invited death. Kayden stepped out of the cave and into the nightmare landscape that had been his entire world for a decade. The sky was wrong. It had always been wrong, would always be wrong. Blood red, stretching endlessly overhead like the inside of some cosmic wound. Black lightning crackled through it at irregular intervals, silent tears in reality that healed shut within seconds. No sun, no moon, no stars. Just that eternal crimson twilight that made it impossible to tell if minutes or hours had passed. He'd stopped counting days after the 1st year, when he'd realized the futility of marking time in a place without it. The ground beneath his bare feet, calloused thick as boot leather, was equally alien. Stone melted into surfaces that felt disturbingly organic, like flesh stretched over bone. They pulsed with a rhythm almost like breathing. In places, actual bones jutted from the earth like tombstones, arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence but revealed nothing. He tried to decipher them once, in his 2nd year. given up when he'd realized any intelligence that created this place was so far beyond human understanding that seeking answers would drive him mad. The air was cold, always cold. Maybe 5 degrees, cold enough to chill, but not quite cold enough to kill. Just another constant discomfort in a place designed to break anything living. Gravity shifted as he walked, a familiar wrongness he'd learned to anticipate. 3 steps forward, normal weight. 4th step, suddenly light, as if he weighed half as much. 5th step, crushing pressure, triple his normal weight. By the 6th step, back to normal. The patterns changed daily, keeping him constantly alert. There was no vegetation, no trees, no grass, no moss, just stone and that strange flesh ground that grew in patches. He'd tried eating it once, desperate and starving in his first month. 2 days of vomiting blood had taught him that lesson. A low growl echoed from somewhere ahead. Kayden's expression didn't change. His grip on the bone sword shifted slightly, fingers finding their familiar positions. His breathing remained steady, his heartbeat didn't increase. Fear had burned out of him somewhere around year 3. The fang crawler emerged from behind a cluster of stone spikes that jutted from the ground like broken teeth. Kayden's mind cataloged it automatically, the way a blacksmith might assess a piece of metal. 2 meters long, 1.5 tall. Bear-like body structure, but grotesquely wrong. 4 writhing tentacles where forelimbs should be, each as thick as his arm, and tipped with barbed hooks that could punch through stone. The head was mostly mouth, split impossibly wide, to reveal rows of teeth designed for tearing rather than cutting. Gray skin covered in bony nodules that would deflect glancing blows. Fast, aggressive, stupid, a mid-level threat. Routine. The crawler roared, a wet, bubbling sound that echoed off the surrounding stone, and charged. Kayden stepped left, his body moving before his mind fully processed the decision. 10 years of survival had pushed his reflexes beyond conscious thought. The creature's first tentacle lashed out, seeking to grab him. It struck empty air where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. The second tentacle followed, faster, reaching for where it predicted he'd dodge. Most prey moved in predictable patterns when fleeing. Kayden wasn't prey. Not anymore. He dropped low instead of dodging again, feeling the barbed appendage whistle over his head close enough to stir his white hair. The crawler's momentum carried it forward, exposing its underside. Soft tissue, no bony plates, just vulnerable flesh. His sword came up in a single, perfect thrust. The blade punched through the jaw from below, angling upward, piercing flesh and bone and whatever passed for a brain in this thing's malformed skull. The crawler shuddered once, a death spasm that sent its remaining tentacles flailing blindly. But Kayden had already moved, dancing backward out of range with the economy of motion that had kept him alive for a decade. The creature collapsed, twitched twice, and went still. 3 movements, 3 seconds. Dead. Kayden pulled his sword free, green-black blood hissing where it touched the blade. He wiped it clean on the creature's hide. He'd learned early that letting the blood dry would corrode even bone, and knelt beside the corpse. Sometimes when monsters die here, something crystallized inside them. Shards formed from the twisted souls of everything the creature had killed. He'd absorbed a few of the smaller ones over the years, back when injuries should have ended him. They'd kept him alive, given him strength when he had none left. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting open the chest cavity, probing through the organs, searching. Nothing. No glow, no pulse of condensed power, just meat and bone. Disappointment flickered through him, distant and muted like everything else. He could remember what emotions used to feel like, the sharp sting of grief, the warm bloom of joy, the hot rush of anger. But after 10 years of constant survival, they'd been worn down to barely perceptible echoes. He could identify them the way a blind man might identify colors, intellectually, but without any real understanding.
It belonged to someone else, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. to a 12-year-old boy who died the moment he fell into this place. Kayden stood, leaving the crawler's corpse behind. Something else would find it. Something else would feed. That was the abyss's only consistent law. Everything was food for something stronger. Find a stronger opponent, his instincts whispered. You need more power. Stagnation is death. He followed that instinct northward, or what his internal compass had decided was north over the years. Direction meant little in a place where space itself twisted, but he'd developed a sense for it. He could feel the pull of stronger predators, could sense the areas where death concentrated like a physical weight pressing against his skin. Time passed, an hour, maybe 3, meaningless. He crested a rise of warped stone and stopped. Before him stood something he had never seen in 10 years of wandering this hellscape. Architecture. The ruins rose from the twisted ground like a skeleton's broken fingers reaching for that blood-red sky. Black stone, darker even than the crimson twilight, formed walls and pillars that had once been part of something far greater. Parts of the structure had collapsed, leaving debris scattered across the approach in patterns that suggested violence rather than gradual decay. But enough remained to show clear purpose and deliberate design. Glowing runes covered every visible surface, pulsing with a soft blue-white light that hurt to look at after so long in the perpetual red dimness. The symbols were like nothing he'd ever seen, not the simple pictograms he vaguely remembered from his village's temple, but complex, layered patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when he looked directly at them. Man-made, his mind supplied, or at least made by something intelligent. In 10 years, 3,650 days, give or take, he had never encountered anything in the abyss that wasn't a monster. No other humans, no other survivors, no signs that anything capable of thought had ever existed here. Just endless predators and endless fighting. This changed everything. Kayden studied the structure from a distance, every sense screaming warnings. The silence was wrong. The abyss always had sound. The distant roars of feeding predators, the scrape of claws on stone, the wet sounds of something dying. But here, within 100 meters of the ruins, there was nothing. Dead, oppressive silence that pressed against his eardrums like physical pressure. Trap. Every survival instinct screamed. Obvious trap. Walk away. Find prey elsewhere. But beneath the warning was something he'd almost forgotten existed. Something that stirred in his chest like a half-dead ember finding oxygen. Curiosity. What was this place? How long had it been here? Had others survived here long ago, long enough to build something? And most importantly, what could he find inside that might help him survive? The questions buzzed in his mind like insects, unfamiliar and uncomfortable, after so long without asking anything except, how do I kill this? And where is the next threat? Kayden made his decision. He would enter. Carefully. He descended the rise with practiced stealth, each footfall placed with precision that made no sound even on the loose scree. His eyes swept the perimeter constantly, looking for signs of recent activity, territorial markings, anything that might used or inhabited this place. Nothing moved. The strange flesh ground around the ruins was dead, dried to a gray crust that cracked under his feet like old parchment. The entrance gaped before him, like a mouth, a dark rectangular opening framed by those writhing, glowing runes. Their blue-white light cast shadows that seemed to move independently of their source, reaching toward him like grasping fingers. Kayden paused at the threshold. His grip tightened on the bone sword until his knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to flee, to find prey he understood. But behind that wall of instinctive fear was something stronger, something he'd thought dead but apparently only dormant. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this place held answers. About where he was, about how to escape, about why a village of frightened people had chosen to sacrifice a 12-year-old boy to save themselves, about whether Kayden Ash could ever be more than just a survivor in hell. He stepped through the entrance, bone sword ready, and left the blood-red twilight behind.
Thank you for listening. New chapters will be released daily on the channel. This audio material was produced exclusively for the Section 56 channel. All rights reserved. Have a nice day.